It always starts the same way, doesn't it? A normal day, birds chirping, coffee steaming, life feeling vaguely under control, until you spot it in your mailbox. A crisp, white envelope, the kind that screams official before you even tear it open. You know exactly the type I mean. Not the cheery red and green of a holiday card, not the promising golden glow of a paycheck. No. This is the shade of doom. The kind of paper stock that feels like it was crafted in a villain's lair, sealed with the smug satisfaction of someone who enjoys making your life unnecessarily complicated. And sure enough, the return address confirmed my fears. The Homeowners Association. 3 words that have struck more terror into suburban hearts than IRS audit or in-laws visiting indefinitely. So I ripped it open, hoping, praying that maybe it was just some generic reminder about trash pickup schedules, maybe a warning about lawn height or a stern suggestion to repaint a fence. Annoying, but survivable. Instead, I was hit with the kind of message that makes you blink 3 times and wonder if you accidentally opened a letter intended for someone else. Your property is in violation of community standards due to failure to maintain the minimum requirement of 5 rooms. Excuse me, what? 5 rooms? My house has 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and bathrooms. By my count, that's definitely over 5 rooms. But apparently, in the magical math world of my HOA, kitchens and bathrooms don't count. They were using some sort of HOA algebra where only habitable rooms of a certain square footage mattered. Translation, the only spaces they acknowledged were bedrooms and living rooms. Which means, by their wild logic, I was running some sort of illegal 2-room flop house. At first I laughed. Surely this had to be a mistake. Maybe the board had mixed up addresses. Maybe this was meant for some poor soul trying to live in a converted shed. But nope, the letter was crystal clear. They weren't suggesting I might be in violation. They were declaring it as fact. And they were giving me exactly 90 days to rectify the violation. Rectify! What a word! As if they expected me to snap my fingers and conjure 2 extra rooms out of thin air like a magician pulling rabbits out of hats. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just a polite nudge. No, they came armed with threats. Fines starting at $100, escalating if I didn't comply, and the looming possibility of a lien slapped right onto my home. A lien over rooms that don't exist. Imagine losing your house because your living room and kitchen apparently don't count. It was absurd, insulting, and oddly hilarious all at once. I mean, who dreams up this nonsense? Somewhere in a board meeting, someone must have leaned back in their chair and said, you know what would really improve property values around here? Making everyone magically add rooms they don't need and can't afford. And instead of someone else laughing them out of the room, the whole board just nodded along like this was a brilliant masterstroke. Now, let's pause here because I need you to picture the full absurdity. Imagine you buy a perfectly normal car. It's got 4 doors, seats 5, works just fine. Then one day, the dealership sends you a letter. Sorry, this car violates community standards. All vehicles must have 7 wheels. You'd laugh, right? Except then they threaten to tow your car, fine you $500 a week, and eventually repossess it. That's exactly what this letter felt like. Only worse, because it was about the roof over my head. And as I held that letter in my hand, I had 2 thoughts. First, are they serious? And second, oh no, they really are serious. Because HOAs have this unique talent for taking the tiniest ounce of authority and inflating it into a balloon of ego the size of the Goodyear blimp. That letter wasn't just paper and ink, it was a declaration of war. And though I didn't know it yet, this was only the opening volley in what would become the most ridiculous, stressful, and strangely satisfying battle I'd ever fight. But if you think the letter itself was bad, wait until you hear the logic behind their rule. Let's just say Einstein would have slammed his chalkboard shut in shame if he saw the HOA's version of math.
So let's talk about the HOA's math skills, or rather, their total lack of them. Because according to my board, my perfectly normal 3-bedroom house with a living room, a kitchen, and multiple bathrooms was apparently not up to code. Why? Because kitchens and bathrooms don't count as rooms. Yup, you heard that right. And their twisted version of reality, cooking a meal or taking a shower, happens in some kind of spatial void that doesn't qualify as part of the house. Now, I don't know what universe they're living in, but where I come from, the kitchen is the beating heart of the home. It's where you start your mornings with coffee, where arguments about whose turn it is to wash the dishes turn into low-key negotiations, and where midnight snack raids happen in complete silence. But according to my HOA, kitchens are basically invisible, non-habitable spaces. Excuse me? I've spent more hours in that kitchen than in any other room in the house. If anything, the living room should be questioned. I mean, what do I really do there besides scroll on my phone pretending to watch Netflix? And bathrooms. Don't even get me started. If the bathroom doesn't count as a room, then someone please tell me what I've been doing in there all this time. According to my HOA's logic, brushing your teeth, showering, and occasionally contemplating the mysteries of the universe on the toilet all happen in some kind of cosmic void. Honestly, if bathrooms don't count, then half the real estate industry needs to redo their marketing. Imagine a listing that says, "Charming family home, 0 bathrooms. Don't worry, it has plumbing, just not rooms." But the board wasn't done inventing their own math. Oh no. They had rules for what qualified as a habitable room. Square footage minimums, ceiling height requirements, and probably some unwritten clause that says the room must be blessed by a unicorn under the light of a full moon. By their definitions, my home magically transformed into an underqualified shack that apparently offended their delicate sensibilities. Now, let's do some real math here, shall we? 3 bedrooms plus 1 living room equals 4. Add in a kitchen, now we're at 5. Tack on bathrooms, and suddenly I'm living in an 8-room palace. But according to the HOA, I had only 4, which meant I was apparently running afoul of some mystical 5-room minimum standard they just pulled out of thin air. Their logic had more holes than Swiss cheese at a mouse convention. And you know what this really boiled down to? Power. Plain and simple. They weren't worried about property values. They weren't worried about community standards. They were flexing their authority, creating rules nobody voted on, and waiting to see who they could intimidate first. And lucky me, I drew the short straw. To really drive home how absurd this was, let's compare it to other scenarios. Imagine your boss tells you your paycheck doesn't count unless at least 80% of the dollars are printed on Tuesdays. Or your kid's school says their straight A's don't count because the teacher's pen wasn't blue enough. That's exactly the kind of energy this rule had. Arbitrary nonsense disguised as authority. And let me tell you, once you start going down the rabbit hole of HOA's logic, you realize it's less logic and more Mad Lib. They can twist definitions any way they want. A perfectly functional home? Nope, it's a violation. A reasonable kitchen? Sorry, kitchens are apparently fantasy land. Bathrooms? Nope, those are just optional side quests. What made this even funnier? Well, funny in a laugh so you don't cry kind of way, was that my neighbors had homes that were smaller than mine. Some didn't even have the same number of rooms I did. But because their houses somehow slipped through the cracks of this creative math, nobody bothered them. I was the chosen one, the guinea pig, the unfortunate test case for their bizarre numerical experiment. By this point, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a board enforcing rules. I was dealing with amateur magicians trying to make numbers disappear. They were basically saying, pay no attention to that kitchen behind the curtain. And I was supposed to nod along and pull out my checkbook and start building imaginary rooms? Absolutely not. So yes, the HOA had decided to rewrite math. But here's the problem with making up your own definitions. You eventually run into someone who knows how to read the actual rules. And when that happens, your little word games start to unravel real fast. And that's exactly what I discovered next. Because when I cracked open the official HOA documents, I found something delicious. There was not a single word, not one, about a 5-room minimum, which meant this so-called rule was as real as monopoly money.
Here's the thing about HOAs. They love to wave around their covenants, conditions, and restrictions like it's the Constitution, the 10 Commandments, and the Hogwarts rulebook all rolled into one. They'll quote it in meetings, they'll cite it in letters, and they'll act like it's carved in stone tablets handed down from some divine suburban authority. So, naturally, when they told me I needed 5 rooms, I thought, okay, fine, show me the rule. So I pulled out my copy of the CC&Rs, not a skim, not a casual glance. I read it the way a lawyer crams for the bar exam, line by line, page by page. And guess what? There was nothing. Not a whisper, not a hint, not even an accidental typo that could be twisted into meaning 5 rooms. The whole thing was squeaky clean of any minimum room count. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think I could march over to the board with my copy, slam it down and say, aha, rule doesn't exist, case closed. But if you think HOA boards care about things like facts or evidence, you're giving them way too much credit. Because when I confronted them with this, their response was peak HOA smugness. We have the authority to interpret architectural guidelines. Interpret? Interpret? I don't know about you, but when I hear interpret, I think of art. A painting that looks like squiggles and someone says it represents the futility of man. Or a poem where every English teacher swears it's about the author's repressed longing for meaning, when maybe it's just about a bird. What I don't think of is interpreting a non-existent rule into being. That's not interpretation. That's imagination. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine your boss walks into your office and says, I interpret the employee handbook to mean you now owe the company your car. You'd laugh him out of the building. But in HOA land, that's basically what they did. They decided their interpretation allowed them to conjure a brand new requirement that never went through a vote, never got approval, and never existed in the first place. And the best part? The bylaws were crystal clear about how new rules had to be made. You couldn't just wake up one morning, decide everyone needed a house with 5 rooms, and poof, it was law. No. There was a process, legal review, a formal notice to all homeowners, a community-wide vote, none of which happened. This wasn't just overreach. This was an HOA board playing make-believe. Here's the thing. Homeowners expect some rules. Fine. Keep your lawn mowed. Don't park your boat in the front yard. Maybe keep your Christmas lights from glowing into July. But minimum number of rooms? That's not just petty, it's nonsensical. And it's not in the documents because no sane developer, lawyer, or previous board thought to include it because it's that ridiculous. At this point, I realized something critical. The board wasn't trying to enforce a rule. They were testing the waters. They wanted to see how far they could push, how much authority they could claim, and whether anyone would challenge them. I just happened to be the unlucky test subject. But here's the twist they didn't count on. I was ready to push back. See, once you realize a rule is a ghost, completely fabricated, you stop being intimidated and start being amused, because nothing makes a bully crumble faster than shining a light on their nonsense. And I had just uncovered the first major crack in their armor. I remember literally laughing out loud when I confirmed it. I flipped through the CC&Rs 3 times thinking, maybe I missed it. But no, this rule wasn't buried somewhere obscure. It just flat out didn't exist. And when you realize your opponent is fighting with imaginary weapons, it gives you confidence. It turns fear into focus. So yes, the 5-room rule was a ghost. An invention, a fairy tale told by a board who thought nobody would bother checking. But here's the funny part. By creating this ghost rule, they actually made themselves more vulnerable. Because if you're willing to invent one phantom standard, what else have you been making up along the way? It opened a door to questioning everything they'd been doing. And believe me, I was about to kick that door wide open. Because once I pointed out the rule didn't exist, I thought the nightmare would end. Spoiler alert, instead of backing down, they escalated. And what started as one bogus letter turned into a legal arms race.
When that first ridiculous letter arrived, I actually started off polite. I know, shocking, right? Because, let's be real, when someone tells you your house is illegal because you're missing 2 imaginary rooms, the urge to reply with a strongly worded, "Are you out of your HOA-loving minds?" is almost irresistible. But I thought, no, let's play this the grown-up way. So I sat down, wrote a professional letter, and laid out the facts. My home was built decades ago. I bought it as is. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the HOA's Bible, had no 5-room requirement. This rule wasn't real, and they needed to drop it. It was clear, respectful, and backed up with logic. Basically, the HOA equivalent of me waving a white flag while holding a law book. And you know what I expected? A sheepish apology. Whoops, our mistake. Maybe even silence. What I didn't expect was the HOA version of going nuclear. Their reply landed like a slap, dismissive, condescending, and absolutely dripping with arrogance. We have the authority to interpret the architectural guidelines. Our decision is final. Translation, we make the rules and you don't matter. Oh, and just to really twist the knife, they enclosed my first fine, $100. Now, $100 is annoying, but survivable. It's like the HOA was dipping its toes into the intimidation pool. See, we can hurt you if we want to. But then came the next notice, $500. No explanation, no discussion, just pay up or else. Then they escalated again, threatening daily penalties. Daily. As in every 24 hours, my wallet would hemorrhage cash just because I wasn't building 2 extra rooms like some suburban wizard. At this point, the HOA wasn't enforcing rules. They were extorting me. It felt less like living in a neighborhood and more like dealing with a mob boss in cul-de-sac chic. Nice house you got there. Shame if something happened to it. Maybe add a couple of rooms, huh? And let me tell you, the emotional toll was real. It's one thing to argue about rules in a community meeting. It's another to have threatening letters piling up, each one scarier than the last. Every trip to the mailbox felt like opening a new episode of HOA The Horror Show. Instead of coupons and pizza flyers, I was getting slapped with fines that could balloon into thousands. Sleep? Forget it. I'd lie awake thinking, what if they're right? What if they actually can take my house over this nonsense? Because that's the nightmare word they love to dangle, lien. They slip it into their letters like poison. Failure to comply may result in a lien on your property. A lien means they can slap a claim on your house, drag you through court, and even force foreclosure. Imagine losing your home not because you didn't pay your mortgage, but because your HOA decided your bathroom doesn't count as a room. And that's their whole strategy, isn't it? Intimidation. They bank on homeowners being too busy, too stressed, or too scared to fight back. Most people will pay the fine just to make it stop, and that's exactly what they were counting on with me. But here's the part they miscalculated. I wasn't wired that way. The more letters they sent, the angrier I got. The more fines they piled on, the more determined I became. And while they were hoping to wear me down, they were actually pushing me into fight mode. Because at some point, you stop feeling bullied and start feeling challenged. And I'm not the type to walk away from a challenge. So I gathered up their letters, every one of them. The dismissive tone, the fake authority, the escalating fines. Each page was like fuel. Because the truth is, when you strip away the threats, their case was built on nothing. They were trying to bluff me into submission, and they were about to learn, I don't fold easy.
And that's when I made a decision. If they wanted to play dirty, fine, I'd play smarter. Which brings us to the binder of justice, the one weapon an HOA fears more than any angry homeowner.
Here's a truth bomb most people don't realize. HOAs hate nothing more than a homeowner who keeps receipts. Not metaphorical receipts, literal ones. Every letter, every email, every time-stamped photo. Because the HOA thrives on intimidation and confusion. They bank on you tossing their letters in a drawer, forgetting dates, or panicking without a plan. But the moment you start documenting like a forensic accountant with a caffeine addiction, that's when you become their worst nightmare. And that's exactly the transformation I went through. One day, I was just a guy with a weird HOA problem. The next, I was a full-on archivist of suburban injustice. I went to the office supply store, bought the thickest 3-ring binder I could find, a stack of plastic sleeves, and a fresh Sharpie. It wasn't just stationery, it was armor. Every letter from the HOA went into that binder. Chronologically, neatly, with sticky notes flagging key threats, absurd claims, and escalating fines. I treated their nonsense like it was evidence in a crime drama. And spoiler alert, it basically was. By the time I was done, my binder of justice was a living, breathing timeline of their arrogance. But I didn't stop at letters. Oh no. I started keeping a phone log. Every call to or from the HOA got noted with date, time, and who said what. If someone coughed on the line, I wrote it down. Because details matter, and HOAs are sloppy. They forget what they told you, they contradict themselves, and when you catch them in those contradictions, it's game over. Then came my favorite part, field work. Picture me walking around the neighborhood with my phone, snapping photos like some nosy detective in a made-for-TV drama. Except instead of catching criminals, I was catching proof that my house wasn't the problem. It was the HOA's selective enforcement. The treasures I found. Homes smaller than mine, houses with clearly fewer habitable rooms, properties that should have been hit with the same bogus 5-room minimum, but weren't. I even had casual conversations with neighbors. Hey, did you ever get fined for your house being too small? Their confused faces said it all. Of course not. The rule wasn't real and the HOA wasn't enforcing it across the board. They had singled me out. And selective enforcement, that's the holy grail of HOA mistakes. Because here's the thing, if an HOA creates a rule, even a bad one, they have to enforce it consistently. They can't just pick one unlucky homeowner, slap them with fines, and let everyone else slide. That's not authority. That's harassment. And harassment wrapped in legalese is still harassment. So into the binder went the photos, dates, addresses, even notes about conversations with neighbors. I became Sherlock Holmes of the cul-de-sac, except instead of a pipe and a magnifying glass, I had an iPhone and a binder thicker than a phone book. Yeah, this thing was that heavy. By the time I was done, I didn't just have a binder. I had a weapon, a chronological, evidence-packed, bulletproof case that turned me from the guy they thought they could bully to the guy who could ruin their entire strategy. And let me tell you, there's something oddly satisfying about weaponizing paperwork. Most people see HOA letters as a headache. I saw them as building blocks. Every fine notice, evidence. Every arrogant dismissal, more fuel. Every contradictory claim, another nail in their coffin. What the HOA didn't realize was that every time they sent me a new threat, they weren't just escalating the conflict, they were feeding the binder. They were handing me ammunition. And by the time I was done, I had enough ammo to level their entire case. Because this is the part HOAs forget. They're supposed to operate within their own governing documents. And when they don't, the paper trail betrays them. And trust me, I had built a trail so clear, so meticulous, that even Perry Mason would have been impressed. So there I was, armed with my binder of justice, a homeowner turned archivist turned amateur legal strategist. And deep down, I knew one thing. The HOA had no idea what was coming.
because once I dug into those governing documents with the binder at my side, I found the first true smoking gun, proof that the HOA had broken their own bylaws. And if there's one thing a judge hates, it's a bully who can't even follow their own rules. Every HOA board loves to puff up their chests and say, "We're just following the bylaws." It's their favorite phrase, like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar saying, "But the rules said I could." The irony? 9 times out of 10, they don't even know their own bylaws as well as they pretend. And in my case, that ignorance turned into my golden ticket. Because one quiet evening with my binder of justice spread across the kitchen table, that non-room that apparently doesn't count as part of my house, I sat down to read the governing documents again. Slowly, carefully, like a lawyer, but with way more snacks. And buried in those pages was the line that changed everything. A clear, no wiggle room rule about how new architectural standards must be created. Step 1, legal review. Step 2, formal notice to all homeowners. Step 3, a 2/3 community vote. Only then could a new rule be adopted. Sounds reasonable, right? Checks and balances. You can't just wake up one day, declare all homes must be painted neon pink, and start issuing fines. There's a process, a democratic process. Except here's the thing. None of that happened with the so-called 5-room minimum. No legal review, no notice, no vote. Just a bunch of power-drunk board members scribbling down nonsense in a closed-door meeting, then mailing it to me like it was gospel. They skipped every safeguard, every procedure, every shred of legality. It was like trying to pass a law by writing it on a napkin at Applebee's. Now, let me pause here and really emphasize how big this is. When an HOA fails to follow its own bylaws, it's not just embarrassing, it's catastrophic. Judges love this kind of thing because bylaws aren't just suggestions, they're binding. They're the HOA's constitution. And when the board tramples its own constitution, boom, case closed. Think of it this way. Imagine your boss writes you up for breaking a rule, only to discover the rule was never actually approved by HR, never sent out in the handbook, and was basically just something he muttered to himself after his morning coffee. That's not discipline, that's delusion. And I had proof. Cold, hard, undeniable proof. I called neighbors. "Hey, did you ever get a notice about a vote on a 5-room rule?" The answers were unanimous. Not a single person remembered voting. Most of them didn't even know such a rule existed until I brought it up, which meant the board hadn't just broken the bylaws, they'd blindsided the entire community. That realization hit me like a rush of adrenaline. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was standing up for every homeowner on the block who could have been next. Because if they could invent this rule out of thin air, what's to stop them from inventing others? All fences must be 6 feet tall, but only on Tuesdays. You must keep 2 flamingos in your yard at all times. Without bylaws, the HOA becomes less of a governing body and more of a dictatorship with clipboards. And let me tell you, HOAs hate when you know this stuff. They thrive on you being intimidated, overwhelmed, and too tired to dig through the paperwork. They never expect you to sit down and actually read the bylaws cover to cover. But I did, and I found their Achilles heel. This was my first true smoking gun. Proof they had overstepped, ignored the law, and tried to enforce a rule that was void from the moment they dreamed it up. And once you've got one smoking gun, you start looking for more. Suddenly, every letter, every fine, every arrogant dismissal is suspect. And trust me, I wasn't done digging. The best part? Sharing this little nugget with my neighbors. Picture me casually bringing it up. "Oh, by the way, did you know the board skipped the voting process when they invented this rule?" The look on their faces was priceless. Outrage, disbelief, and just a hint of schadenfreude, because everyone has their gripes with the HOA, but nobody expects the board to be this sloppy. So now the board had a problem. Their rule wasn't a rule at all. It was a fantasy. And I had the documents, the process, and the witnesses to prove it, which meant their fines weren't just unfair, they were illegal. And once I had that first smoking gun in my back pocket, I knew it was time to level up. If the board wanted to fight, I wasn't going in alone. I was about to bring in a lawyer and turn my binder into their worst nightmare.
Here's the thing about HOAs. They count on you not lawyering up. They figure you'll whine a little, maybe grumble to a neighbor, and eventually write the check just to shut them up. Because lawyers are expensive, right? That's their bet. They think you'll weigh the cost of hiring an attorney against the cost of just paying the fines and say, cheaper to surrender. But here's what they didn't realize. I wasn't in the mood to play their game. I wasn't about to bankroll their nonsense. I wasn't going to pay them to bully me. If they wanted a war, they were about to get one, with a legal professional leading the charge. So I started shopping for lawyers. And let me tell you, picking an HOA attorney feels a little like choosing a superhero. You don't want just anyone. You want someone who has spent years punching HOAs in the face with legal briefs. Someone who knows all their dirty tricks, all their loopholes, all their weaknesses. Someone who could walk into mediation, slam a stack of statutes on the table and say, "Sit down, clowns. The grown-ups are talking now." And oh, did I find the right one? This attorney didn't just know HOA law. He lived it. He'd fought boards, beaten back bogus fines, and basically built his career on holding overreaching HOAs accountable. When I explained my case, he barely blinked. He didn't laugh, but he did smirk, the kind of smirk that says, "This board has no idea what storm is about to hit them." The first move? A cease and desist letter. And friends, let me tell you, this was no ordinary letter. This wasn't a polite "please stop." This was a legal symphony of doom. It laid out in excruciating detail exactly how the board had violated its own bylaws. It cited chapter and verse of state law requiring HOA rules to be reasonable and properly adopted. It included my evidence binder, photos of neighbors' homes, copies of their threatening letters, documentation of selective enforcement. It was a legal roast session, and the HOA was the main course. And here's the part that made me smile. When the letter was finished, my lawyer read it out loud in his office, like a dramatic monologue. Hearing it spoken out loud was like watching a courtroom drama on TV. Only this wasn't scripted. It was real. It was my life. And it was my lawyer basically saying, either you back off now, or we'll see you in court where you're going to get embarrassed. We sent it off. Certified mail, signature required, because nothing says I'm serious like making someone sign for their own doom. And then silence. The HOA didn't reply. They didn't apologize. They didn't back down. They did what bullies always do when cornered. They tried to pretend it wasn't happening. They thought if we ignored us, we'd just go away. Rookie mistake. Because here's what the HOA didn't understand. The cease and desist wasn't the end. It was the warm-up, the opening act, the appetizer. If they didn't respond, the next step wasn't me throwing my hands up in defeat. The next step was legal escalation, and I was ready. By hiring a lawyer, the power dynamic flipped overnight. Suddenly, it wasn't just me versus the board. It was me, backed by an experienced professional, versus a group of volunteers who probably hadn't read their own bylaws since the day they were elected. Suddenly, they weren't the authority, they were the defendants, waiting for their court date. And the best part? Watching their arrogance slowly melt. You could feel it in the way their tone shifted. No more smug, "our word is final" nonsense. No more cocky threats. Now it was guarded emails, nervous delays, and the realization that they weren't holding the cards anymore. That's the beauty of lawyering up. It's not just about having someone argue your case. It's about sending a message. I know my rights. I have evidence. And now I have someone who can turn your fake authority into actual legal consequences. HOAs thrive on intimidation until you show them you're not intimidated anymore. And that's when we went from defense to offense, because we didn't just want them to stop, we wanted the court to officially declare their 5-room rule invalid. And for that, we unleashed the legal nuke, declaratory relief. Here's the thing about fighting an HOA. You can write letters, you can file complaints, you can even gather a binder so thick it could stop a bullet. But if the board refuses to back down, you've got to bring out the big guns. And in the legal world, that big gun has a name: declaratory relief. Now, if you've never heard of declaratory relief, let me break it down in the simplest way possible. Imagine you're playing Monopoly with a friend, and they suddenly announce, "New rule. All players have to give me $500 every time I roll the dice." You argue, you flip through the rule book, you know it's nonsense, but they keep insisting. So finally, you call in the referee, someone who can slam the rule book down and say, "Nope, that's not how this works." That's declaratory relief. You're asking a judge to declare, once and for all, what the actual rules are. And in this case, whether the HOA's imaginary 5-room requirement even exists. And let me tell you, the beauty of declaratory relief is that it doesn't just solve my problem, it sets a precedent for everyone in the neighborhood. It's like firing a legal flare into the sky that says, "Attention, this HOA is officially overreaching, and here's the proof." That's not just defense, that's offense. So my lawyer and I drafted the paperwork. It was meticulous, surgical, and just a little bit savage. We laid out the HOA's violations like a greatest hits album of incompetence. Exhibit A, they skipped the process for adopting new rules. Exhibit B, their selective enforcement of the so-called rule. Exhibit C, their bogus fines levied without legal authority. Each point was like a nail in the coffin, hammered in with satisfying precision. But here's where it got fun. We didn't ask for money. Nope. We weren't chasing damages or trying to cash in. We were chasing something far more dangerous to an HOA: validation from a judge. We wanted the court to flat out declare the 5-room rule invalid, the fines unenforceable, and their actions unlawful. Because once a judge stamps that ruling, the HOA can't spin it. They can't gaslight the neighbors. They can't bury it in legalese. It's black and white, binding, and permanent. And just filing that suit changed the entire game. Suddenly, I wasn't just a homeowner writing angry letters. I was a plaintiff. The HOA wasn't just a board with clipboards and smug attitudes. They were defendants in a legal case. That word alone, defendant, takes the wind out of their sails, because now they're not the authority. Now they're the ones being judged. The best analogy? It's like when the schoolyard bully gets dragged into the principal's office. They can swagger all they want on the playground, but under the fluorescent lights, facing actual authority, they shrink fast. And that's exactly what started happening with the HOA. Of course, they tried to wiggle out. They tried to dismiss the case, claiming it wasn't, quote, ripe for judicial review. That's legal speak for, "Please, Your Honor, don't make us actually defend our nonsense." But the judge didn't buy it. Because when you show up with bylaws in hand, signed affidavits from neighbors, and a binder full of dated photos, it's hard to argue that your rule is anything but a fairy tale. And here's the kicker. Filing for declaratory relief isn't just about shutting down one rule. It calls the HOA's entire approach into question. If they made up this rule, what else have they done wrong? If they ignored procedure once, how many other times have they cut corners? A case like this shines a floodlight on everything. And trust me, HOAs don't like that kind of exposure. For me, declaratory relief was the turning point. It was the legal equivalent of flipping the chessboard. Up until then, they'd been moving their pawns, fines, threats, smug letters. But when we filed, it was like dropping the queen on the table and saying, checkmate. And honestly, the psychological shift was just as satisfying as the legal one. Because after weeks of feeling bullied and cornered, I finally felt powerful. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was going on the attack. I was using their own rule book, their own procedures, their own arrogance against them. And that, my friends, is a feeling worth savoring. And the real payoff came next, when we all sat down for mediation. Picture 5 board members suddenly realizing they'd gone from ruling the neighborhood to begging for mercy at a conference table. It was glorious.
If you've never seen HOA board members in mediation, let me paint you a picture. It's like watching lions suddenly realize they're not predators, they're the prey. All that bravado, all that smug, we're the authority energy, gone. Replaced by nervous glances, sweaty foreheads, and awkward silence. It's glorious. So there we were, gathered in a bland conference room, straight out of every corporate training video you've ever seen. Beige walls, lukewarm coffee, and a table too shiny for its own good. On one side, me and my attorney. On the other, the HOA board. 5 of them, lined up like a discount boy band nobody asked for. Behind them sat their lawyer, trying and failing to look confident. And then there was me, sitting there with my binder of justice like it was the nuclear launch codes. The thing was practically glowing with power. Every letter, every photo, every time-stamped piece of evidence was neatly organized, ready to be unleashed at the perfect moment. The mediator, bless them, tried to start things off light. "We're here to find a resolution," they said, in that calm, soothing tone designed to keep people from flipping the table. But the second my lawyer started laying out our case, you could feel the shift in the room. Exhibit A, the bylaws they ignored. My attorney read the section out loud, slowly, like a teacher reading to kids who hadn't done their homework. You could practically see the board members sinking in their chairs, wishing they were invisible. Exhibit B, selective enforcement. Out came the photos. Dozens of homes smaller than mine with fewer quote-unquote habitable rooms, none of which had been fined. The board members avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by the conference table's wood grain. One even started doodling on his legal pad. Classic I don't want to be here energy. Exhibit C, the fines themselves. My lawyer presented them like a stack of Monopoly cards. Here's where you demanded $100. Here's where you jumped to $500. Here's where you threatened daily penalties. The mediator raised their eyebrows at that one. Daily fines over imaginary rooms? Even they looked impressed by the sheer audacity. By the halfway point, the board looked less like an authority and more like kids caught shoplifting. Their lawyer tried to salvage it, arguing that the board had broad discretion. My attorney pounced. Discretion doesn't mean inventing rules. It means enforcing existing ones. And these don't exist. Boom. Checkmate. Honestly, the highlight of the day was watching the body language. These were the same people who sent me condescending letters, who threatened liens, who acted like my home was beneath their precious standards. And now, one was nervously tugging at his tie. Another kept sipping water like his life depended on it. The president of the board, who signed those letters with such confidence, avoided my gaze entirely. It was delicious. The mediator finally cut through the tension. Look, based on what I'm hearing, it seems this rule wasn't properly adopted and enforcement has been inconsistent. Perhaps we should discuss a settlement. Translation. You guys are toast. Make peace before this gets worse. And worse it would have gotten, because if this case had gone to trial, it wouldn't just be about my home. It would have called their entire authority into question. Every rule, every fine, every action they'd ever taken could have been scrutinized. And trust me, they did not want that microscope turned on them. So, after a few whispered conversations, the board caved. Completely. They agreed to rescind the 5-room minimum. They agreed to void every fine. And then came the cherry on top. They had to pay my attorney's fees. That's right. The very people who tried to drain my wallet ended up funding my legal victory. And you know what? That was better than any dollar amount I could have sued for. Because money comes and goes. But watching the HOA slink out of that mediation room, defeated, humiliated, and lighter in the bank account, that's priceless. And that brings us to the grand finale.
the victory itself. Not just winning for me, but sending a message to the entire neighborhood. You don't have to bow down to a rogue HOA.
Victory tastes sweet. But you know what makes it even sweeter? When the people who tried to bury you end up footing the bill for your win. And that's exactly how this story ended. Not with me caving to bogus fines, not with liens on my home, but with the HOA board crawling back, rescinding their ghost rule, canceling every penny they tried to squeeze out of me, and writing a fat check to cover my attorney's fees. If karma were a sport, this was the championship game. Let's pause for a second to appreciate how rare that is. HOAs are used to being the final word. They love being judge, jury, and executioner of the cul-de-sac. They dish out fines like Oprah gives away cars. You get a violation, and you get a violation. Everyone gets a violation. But this time, the script flipped. Instead of them making me pay, they were the ones reaching into their piggy bank. And trust me, nothing wipes the smug smile off an HOA board faster than realizing they've just paid for the lawyer who destroyed them. And the best part? It wasn't just about me. Sure, my fines vanished, my house was safe, and I got to sleep at night without imagining bulldozers showing up to add phantom rooms. But the victory went deeper. The whole neighborhood won. Because by shutting down this nonsense in court, we set a precedent. The board couldn't just invent rules whenever they felt like flexing. They couldn't pull requirements out of thin air and hope no one would challenge them. They had to follow the bylaws. They had to follow the law. Period. Word spread fast. Neighbors started stopping me on walks, saying things like, "Hey, I heard about what you did with the board. That was incredible." Some even admitted they'd gotten letters in the past that felt wrong but didn't know how to fight them. Suddenly, people weren't just annoyed with the HOA, they were aware of their rights. And nothing scares a power-drunk board more than an informed community. On a personal level, the relief was indescribable. For weeks, my mailbox had been a source of dread. Every envelope felt like a new grenade tossed into my life. After the settlement, walking out to get the mail felt normal again. Bills, coupons, junk flyers. That was it. No more bogus fines, no more threats, just boring, everyday mail. And let me tell you, boring mail never looked so beautiful. But more than relief, there was pride. Because standing up to an HOA isn't easy. They have the advantage of authority, the appearance of legitimacy, and the intimidation factor. Most homeowners give up because it feels impossible to win. But I did win. And I won not because I yelled the loudest, but because I was strategic. I read the documents. I documented everything. I hired the right lawyer, and I stayed relentless. That's the formula. And yes, the board went quiet after that. Quieter than a library on a Tuesday morning. Meetings got shorter. Letters got friendlier. Suddenly, they weren't in a rush to flex their authority anymore. Funny how that happens when you get burned. Now here's what I want every homeowner watching this to take away. HOAs are not gods. They're not kings. They're boards of volunteers bound by rules and laws. And those rules apply to them just as much as they apply to you. If they break their own bylaws, they lose their power. If they selectively enforce rules, they expose themselves to legal consequences. And if they try to bully you, document, research, and if needed, lawyer up, because the law is on your side more often than you think. So yes, this wasn't just a win. It was a win with interest. I got my peace of mind, I got my house safe, and I got my lawyer paid by the very people who tried to squeeze me. And in the process, I sent a message that echoed across the neighborhood. We don't have to take it. Now, I want to hear from you. What's the most ridiculous HOA demand you've ever seen? Was it paint color rules, lawn length wars, or something even crazier? Drop your story in the comments, because every tale shared helps another homeowner realize they're not alone in this fight. And if you got any value out of this saga, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to @HOA-WARS, and share this video with your neighbors, because knowledge is power, and together we can keep these HOA bullies in check.